Hello everyone, my name is Venki Subramanian. I'm a student of the Seminar in Finance course in fall of 2024. So today we are going to look at chapter 11 in the course, which is Decentralized Institutions, the Future of Bitcoin. So that's the name of the chapter. And inside that, we have, so I have broken this down into several segments. The first segment being introduction, and then the second one being, Bitcoin as a vehicle for decentralization. Number three is routes to blockchain integration, and then there's a framework for decentralization, and in what situations is decentralization a good idea. And the final segment being some of the key challenges and the potential path forward. So without further ado, we will get into the topic. So the first heading is introduction to this like blockchain decentralization. So you know what's the core innovation behind Bitcoin? So Bitcoin is a key differentiator from its previous digital cash atoms is the decentralization. So this decentralization through blockchain is the key differentiator from its predecessors. And the blockchain is basically the technology that enables this decentralization. And generally, Bitcoin or blockchain is seen as a new currency. A Bitcoin is seen as a new currency. But the concept or the technology of blockchain can be implemented beyond currencies. It can be implemented in a lot of other areas wherever intermediary is used. So that's some of the areas that we are going to focus on today. So, and also we look at like technically whether how it's feasible, and what are some of the implications to the end user, and also like we'll also evaluate with an example on practically where this can be applied. So that we'll move on to the next slide. So you know, uh, Bitcoin or the blockchain as a vehicle for decentralization. So as we already stated, Bitcoin's core innovation is basically enabling decentralization through the blockchain. So previously, in any general financial institution, let's say if party A transfers money to party B, it goes through a financial intermediary. So even if one bank, money transfer from one bank to another bank goes through a financial intermediary. So the whole concept of blockchain is how we can eliminate the intermediary and instead have the participants as the key factors or that actually validate these transactions that happen inside your blockchain. So one great example here is like a smart property example, which is using the car ownership using blockchain. So if you see the current car systems, there are two main locking mechanisms. The first one is obviously the physical door locks, which locks and secures the car, and the second is your electronic immobilizer. So which is using your key fob, and key fob is of your car is like your wireless communication. So the action is the user pressing a button, which wirelessly communicates to the car, and then it enables you to open the car or close the car. So this is a standard, current car system. So, and how can this be modified, for example, using a blockchain environment? So in a blockchain environment, typically, it requires a lot of sort of imagination to kind of think through this as well, right? So in a blockchain based environment, it replaces like the hard-coded manufacturer keys, like the key fob that you get from the manufacturer, with a sort of like a blockchain based authentication, right? So, in the previous chapters, we've looked at like public keys, private keys, and how that's being handled. So, in this example, for example, the public key of a particular vehicle can be stored in like blockchain instead of the car's memory. So right now, when you work with a key fob, it's stored in car's memory, and that's how you do the interaction. With the blockchain, this can be moved from car's memory to the blockchain. And also, like for example, if you take like a manufacturing process of a car, and how does this ownership transfer happen? So initially, when the car is being manufactured and assembled, it stays in an assembly line, right? So the ownership transfer chain would go something like this, like it is in an assembly chain, and from assembly, once after the car is assembled and ready, then the ownership transfers happens to the quality control. So who's they're going to do all the QC checks and everything. And once after quality control is done, then it goes to your pick package. So it's basically shipping. So it goes into your delivery module. So people that are in the delivery section of the operations of a manufacturing warehouse will take ownership of it. And then once they ship the product out the door, then it goes into a dealership. So then the ownership transfer happens to the dealership, and then from dealership, whoever buys the car, happens to be the first owner, will take ownership of the car. So all of these transactions that is happening through the manufacturing cycle, through the quality control, through the shipping, and through dealership transfer to the owner, all of this will be recorded as a blockchain transaction. So by doing that, each person basically has their own key fob in this case, which is like a unique signing key. And as and when the transfership happens, you either like activate or deactivate their keys based on these blockchain transactions. So once if I'm the dealer, then I have an active key, and once it's sold, then that gets deactivated. So which means I lose the ability to um, lock or unlock the car. So which is a pretty future-sighted approach, and one thing that's commonly seen across a lot of researchers and research pundits is that this is going to be the future in a lot of other implementations like that. Future possible applications of um, where decentralization or basically blockchains can be used. So what are some of the key technical challenges here, right? So, authentication process, obviously, like, this now, if you're going to take it out of the actual physical key fob and move it into a blockchain, then, obviously this whole authentication becomes a real, important feature. So, so obviously, as I said before, the car would store basically the public keys, and then, the fob must basically sign a challenge, for example, like with using a private key, and then the signature can be verified using, blockchain recorded any public keys. So, this way you're also linking the, physical possession with digital ownership records. And it also talks about, atomic transactions that basically is security implication, right? So what are atomic transactions? These are, this basically prevents any partial transfers, and it makes sure that parties don't cheat in these transactions. And for simple transactions, you can eliminate the need for like an escrow. And also, we have to, every time a transaction happens, both the buying as well as the receiving party, put their thumbprints, basically put their signatures, and through which the ownership transfer can be recorded in the blockchain. All right. So that's one real solid example. And likewise, there's a lot of other implications, a lot of other applications where a blockchain can be used for decentralization. All right, moving on. What are the routes to blockchain integration? So, this is basically it can be understood or explained through two primary approaches. The first one is, directly on a Bitcoin. So this represents the most straightforward path, right? It uses the existing, existing Bitcoin infrastructure. It uses the existing, takes advantages, it takes advantage of the and harnesses the existing security features. Um, and also, obviously, Bitcoin has high mining power, which makes it immediately deployable. However, as the presentation states, it also comes with certain limitations, right? So Bitcoin was originally implemented as a currency transaction initiative. So obviously it may not be used to work as is for applications that are outside of a currency exchange. So it might require some additional enhancements or additional work on these softwares, on these tools to make it usable for other applications. So may not be used as is. And obviously, in order to perform, workarounds like this, it might also it is very expensive, and so in certain situations, people that are building have to get innovative and build some workarounds to handle this. All right. So, what are some of the alternative blockchain options? Obviously, like one of the examples that's given here is like the customer can create. It's basically custom solutions, right? So you can build your own custom altcoins, and this can be built tailored for very specific application with very specific features. And also, the other thing is like, it can be pegged to a Bitcoin. So basically, you can backport or import features from a Bitcoin, one to one. And then on top of that, you're building custom features, to handle that specific application. And also thirdly, like the other key element here is it can certainly utilize platforms like, Ethereum that are specifically designed to handle complicated contracts. So obviously, like, we talked about two different major routes here, and both have its own advantages as well as disadvantages. Obviously the direct Bitcoin offers immediate stability because it's already an existing platform, and so it's also highly secure. However, the functionality is very limited. Obviously, it was designed keeping currency exchange in mind. So if you were to pivot that and use it for other applications, the functionality can be limited and might require further enhancement. Obviously, like, the alternate blockchains which are built specifically for certain features, obviously is going to be very, very robust in terms of functionalities and capabilities. However, on the other side, the security and trust can be a challenge, and obviously this need to be worked through. So depending on the area of the implementation, it is certainly pertinent to choose what's the better route, whether it's the route 1 or route 2, which is either directly on Bitcoin or alternate blockchains. That can be chosen based on specific implementations. So moving on to the next slide. All right, so we talked about two different approaches. Now, we're going to talk about framework. So when we go for decentralization, what's that framework going to look like? So obviously, like, there are certainly, the document or the author provides like four key questions that is usually asked when it comes to decentralization. First question, obviously, what's being decentralized, right? So this is, what feature are we trying to, where are we eliminating that intermediary layer? What exactly are we trying to do? Is this, a property ownership, or is it in the financial services arena, or maybe any other, government or institutional functions? So um, answering this question clarifies the scope of decentralization. So this is basically identifying the scope of work. Just like any other project management activity, the step one identifies the scope of work that's being decentralized. The second question is, okay, now we've identified which domain are we trying to decentralize. The second one is like, what is the level of decentralization? What's the depth of decentralization? So, on what spectrum does this decentralization exist, right? And one way of looking at it could be, hey, let's on a particular implementation, let's go ahead and eliminate all of the intermediaries, right? So if there is four links on the chain, right, intermediary chain, like how can we eliminate all of that and decentralize this whole? So, is there value in doing that? Alternatively, a more pragmatic approach would be, um, you know, finding a competitive decentralization, right? So where there is multiple intermediaries are competing to provide uh, similar services, and whoever is providing at the best return on investment, um, with a lot of choice and flexibility, you want to go with that approach. All right. So now after like understanding the what's the scope and what's the depth of decentralization, the third question is like which blockchain needs to be deployed. So this is basically framework question, right? So one of the topics that we talked earlier, route one, route two, is a good way of looking at this question. So, here several factors are considered. Obviously, security is a key, functionality, and also if we can take advantage of the existing infrastructure. So, right, again, kind of goes back to the previous slide, using Bitcoin as a route versus using an alternate coin, right? So that's what's being addressed in this question. And the fourth, what security mechanism is used. We can never oversee this particular topic, where we must establish what security mechanisms are being used. And these can certainly range from several technological solutions, like the atomic transactions that we looked earlier in one of the slides, to maybe social mechanisms, right, like reputation-based systems. Now, obviously, again, even in this, each system or mechanism that we pick has its own advantages as well as limitations. So, detailed design study has to happen while we try to answer these questions. And in terms of kind of going back to the levels of decentralization, yeah, so there are, again, several sub topics in here. Complete disintermediation, which is basically eliminating all of the intermediaries. Competitive decentralization, so it's basically, multiple competing intermediaries that offer, similar functionality, choices, and, flexibility. And, we also talked about security through atomicity or reputation-based systems, and also the key trade-off is between efficiency and dispute resolution. All right, so moving on to the next slide. When is decentralization is a good idea, right? Um, so, one of the key things when it comes to evaluating if decentralization is appropriate, um, we must look at whether decentralization is technically possible, whether it can be implemented. And also, another key element that's constantly got to be looked at is what are the real world implications. So, the key insight that decentralization works best is basically when it's complements with the existing institutions rather than attempting to replace them completely. So obviously certain existing institutions, which it could be an intermediary, comes with certain best practices. And so one of the challenges that have to be constantly looked at is, by eliminating that, are we still keeping the best practices, or have we lost efficiency, right? And obviously these implementations can be very costly. And so one of the key questions that needs to be looked at is there an efficient ROI? So obviously, like some of the key advantages of decentralization, obviously that's been, pretty clearly established, is efficient ownership transfer. So, if there's an intermediary, obviously, there's a third party involved. So there is additional validation, there is additional time consumption, there is an extra layer in the chain. So, that's not necessarily um, synchronous with efficiency. So eliminating a layer, fastening transactions, and still, if you're able to keep the security intact and the validity of the transactions intact, then obviously decentralization can be very, very effective. And also eliminating an intermediate layer increases privacy. So obviously the data sharing obviously happens between the party that's selling and another party that's buying, and you've eliminated data sharing with other parties that are actually not involved in the transaction. And also, it gives you choices in the mediators and also dispute resolution. Obviously, these are blockchains, and with certain algorithms, the dispute resolution process can be made more secure and tightened. What are some of the challenges, where decentralization may not be a good idea, right? Is if securing a private key is a challenge, and digital assets. So there's not physical assets; they're digital assets. And if there is no central authority, then how do you handle disputes? That's obviously a challenge as well. And also, one of the other key challenges we talked about, especially with the developed nations, is there is strong existing legal and institutional frameworks that are put in place. So, how do you make sure that when you're actually decentralizing some of these key functionalities? So, for example, a DMV is a great example. When somebody is selling a car, somebody is buying a car, you go through a DMV. So, this is a government institutionalized legal framework, right? So, the DMV acts as a intermediary that takes a car title from the seller and also, issues a new title to the buyer. So, they go through several validation processes, and they act as this, intermediary that takes care of the legal framework. So, if you are going to build a decentralized uh, approach here, so how do we make sure that the new design or the new approach using blockchains still are validating or going through all of the legal framework that's involved? So those are some key questions that need to be addressed as we are thinking through decentralization using blockchain for for its applications and purposes. So what are some of the best areas where it can be used? When obviously when there are clear inefficiencies in the existing system, using an intermediary, that would be a low-hanging fruit. So that can be an area where decentralization using blockchain can certainly help. And as we discussed before, when these act as a complementary functions to the existing institutions, then it works even better. So basically, existing institutions might use really complicated processes to do the validation of the transaction. So obviously, that's what happens with the intermediaries are used to validate the transaction and execute the transaction, and they may be going through really complicated design or complicated approach, which is not efficient today. So rather than replacing the entire organization, entire intermediary, Bitcoin or the blockchain can come in handy, where they can provide complementary services. So you can make the intermediaries efficient as well. And also, like obviously, economic incentives, if they align with decentralization, then yes, absolutely, that would be a great path forward. All right, moving on, the last slide here. This is going to talk about, right? We talked about decentralization, and so in a summary level, what are some of the key challenges, and what's the path forward, right? How can blockchain be used beyond the currency narrative? Where what are the other areas where it can be used? So this is in essence, a summary of what we discussed so far. Some of the key challenges we talked before, it revolves around digital security, because all of these transactions are going to be digital, not physical. So, and also key management, right? The public key, private key management that we talked about. And obviously, if there is a dispute in a transaction, or we don't have central authorities, if you say, if you decentralize and remove a central authority, um, there has to be proper protocols put in place to handle the disputes, which does not exist today. So certainly it's still seen as a challenge. And also, what's the right balance? What's the right mix and match between automation and human intervention, right? If you go 100% automation and there's no human involvement, then obviously, it kind of goes back and emphasizes the other two bullet points that we discussed before in terms of how is it going to be secure, right? And, if there's going to be a dispute, how is that going to be managed? So having the right balance between automation of systems plus human intervention is the key. And also another key challenge, or is certainly integration with the existing legal frameworks. So having said that, what's the path forward, right? This is something that I think I did, emphasized on some of the previous slides as well. Is this technological solution of using a blockchain should be a complementary feature, and I think that's where the big win is, rather than trying to replace some of the existing institutions. And obviously, there needs to be a proper ROI, return on investment, on this project, where there's got to be compelling financial and economic reasons that should drive decentralization versus, hey, I can decentralize this functionality because I can decentralize, versus there is a need and there is a opportunity to improve efficiency. There is an opportunity to save cost. There is an opportunity to be more efficient. So that should be driving the decentralization needs. And obviously success, this sort of like goes in tangent with the challenge, which is the success of this depends on integration with the regulatory and legal practices of the governments and the other regulatory bodies that they are dealing with. And last one, obviously, the focus should be on addressing real inefficiencies and power imbalances and challenges. So all in all, success of its implementation of a decentralized system, will require careful attention to economic incentives and ensuring that this decentralization will solve real world problems rather than creating new problems. And also, the future of uh, a blockchain based decentralization um, is not revolutionary anymore, right? So the revolutionary change is already there, it's already in use, but it's got to be seen as more of an evolutionary change. So the design, the system is in place. How do we take it forward? How do we make it more strong? How do we make it more secure? And how do we make it more robust? Are some of the factors that need to be focused on, and how can we evolve and improve the existing systems will drive the path forward. So with that, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to present my understanding and my view of this topic of future of Bitcoin. Thank you so much and have a nice day.